Hello there, Ian here once again, and it's a pleasure to be able to be with you. I hope this is catching you happy, healthy and strong. Today we're going to be continuing our little mini-series on getting the job done. How we can continue to execute with excellence to reach our weekly and monthly objectives, our quarterly milestones and our bigger goals beyond that. And today we're going to be talking about what job we're focusing on. What is the job to be done right now? And how we can create the most value. To begin the story, you may have heard of the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle, as it's often called. And this was popularized by a gentleman called Vilfredo Pareto, who was studying wealth and I think real estate distribution in Italy. And he concluded that about 20% of the population had about 80% of the wealth. And he began to study that phenomenon a bit more broadly and found that the ratio was cropping up a lot in everyday life. For example, in any project or any big endeavour, about 20% of the tasks accounted for 80% of the time it takes. In any project, about 20% of the tasks created 80% of the value. And if you've ever moved house or done something on that scale, you probably find the ratio crops up there. About 20% of the things that you are spending time on take 80% of the overall time and probably the cost too. So how can we use this to the best effect on getting the job done? How we can execute with excellence? Well, if you're like any entrepreneur or any executive, manager, supervisor, you have probably got a number of demands on your time. For example, team members might be wanting to talk to you about the projects that they're working on, some of the problems that they're having. They want your advice or your take on certain things. You've got customers and suppliers that want to talk to you perhaps. You've got emails to answer, phone calls to take. And these are normal tasks. And then you've got those small number of tasks that create 80% of the value for the company that maybe can only be done by you, and most importantly need that focused, dedicated thought. Just for fun, to see how dramatic this can be, let's do the 80-20 calculation on the 80-20 as in looking at that 20% and taking 20% of that and taking 80% of the 80%. And if we do that calculation, we get about 5% of our time, creating about 64% of the value. And if we do the calculation once more, just for fun, 20% of 5 is 1. And 80% of 64 is 50, give or take the odd decimal place. So we end up with 1% of our time and our tasks creating 50% of the value for the company. So that's quite a staggering thought if we look at the mathematics. Now, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, that's a neat mathematical trick, but does it really work in the real world? Well, of course, you would be right. And it depends on what you focus on in that 1% or that 5 or 20%. It depends what you do that will create the bulk of the value. It depends on what it is. And we all know, or maybe you know, a story that may be myth and legend, but it goes something like this. There's a factory that is down. It's got a power outage and the factory has ground to a halt because the machines can't run. They call in an electrician who looks at the power distribution board and the electrical supply to the factory, goes back to the van and pulls out a small fuse, goes into the distribution box and replaces one of the fuses, one of the circuit breakers, and the factory is back up and running. And that takes about 10 minutes, and he presents a bill to the factory manager for $200. And the factory manager is aghast at this. He says, how can you charge me $200 for something that took 10 minutes of your time and you just got a $2 fuse? And the electrician says, okay, fair enough, I'll break it down for you. The price for replacing the fuse, $2. For knowing which fuse to change, $198. So it does illustrate the point that there is a very, very close association with a small number of tasks that create the most value. Now, like we said before, you've got a number of demands on your time, and those tasks need to be handled. They can't just be forgotten about while you focus on the high value tasks. So here are 3 options we can use to be able to steward our time better and focus on what really creates value. And they all begin with D. The first one is to delete. So we can get rid of that task. If we are doing something that is not necessary, maybe it's a legacy task from years before, but it's clearly not necessary anymore. It might be a report that was being produced that nobody looks at and is irrelevant now, but we can simply get rid of it. We can delete it. It's no longer necessary. Option 1. Option 2 is delegate. So I'm sure you've heard the term before, delegate, but that doesn't mean dumping the task on somebody else. It's got to be professionally delegated so that the task is handled by someone who is properly trained, has the proper guidance and coaching, and so that that job can be done by somebody else effectively, and sometimes even more effectively than if we did it ourselves. So we can delete it, we can delegate it, and the last one is we can design out. We can design a system or a group of systems and controls so that those decisions can be handled by a system that don't require our input and judgment. It can be handled by a system, and often some internal controls so that we no longer have to be directly involved. So we can delete it, delegate it, or design it out and let the business handle that by way of a system. That way we can continually prune off the demands in our time and progressively focus on those high value tasks that probably only we can do, that create the most value and help secure the future of the business and the team members that are working in it. So today, remember, it's only a small amount of the time that you spend that creates the most value. Keep pruning away the low value items with those 3 techniques and focus ever more on what creates the most value. I hope that did make sense. Have a fantastic week ahead, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.